So I want to just put a massive hello and welcome to everyone to this CIPD Manchester event. And this would normally be a cake camp. So we'd normally be in a cafe somewhere with lots of cake and tea and coffee. You have to do that virtually, unfortunately. I know, sorry, so hopefully you've all got your brews. I've got my big Christmas mug, keeping festive. Reminder of anyone who's just joined, make sure your name beneath your image is your correct name. And in terms of future events, we've got 2 or 3 more that are coming up between now and the middle of December. So the quick promotion on this I want to just let you know about is we have a policy event, which is how policy is shaping the future of work. And then we also have a wellbeing event coming up as well. So have a look out for those. They're all on our Eventbrite page. I've mentioned Twitter. I'm going to keep this really interactive, so I want to hear all your thoughts or your ideas. Keep the chat going. We'll be in the breakouts. And at this point, I'm going to bring in Mark. So let's get started. So Mark, Dr. Mark Batey, is a highly published researcher in creativity, innovation, and leadership, with speaking, training, consulting experience across industries and geography. And your research spans individual, team, organizational, and regional studies of creativity, innovation, and leadership. And I hope you recognize that because I nicked it off your website. So
that does sound familiar.
So if you want to learn a bit more about Mark, I'll just pop the link in the chat. And Mark, over to you.
Super. Thank you very much, Daniel. You're going to get sick to death with my voice by the end of this, so let me not even start there. Hopefully, if this is all going to work correctly, Jane, who's been drafted in at the very last minute and is learning on the job, just in time control, is hopefully going to put you in a breakout group. You're going to say hello to some people. Here's the instructions. You're going to have 5 minutes maximum for all of you to do your intro. So I need those intros super short, Twitter style intros. You've got 140 characters. That's the first task. Introduce yourself, 140 characters, Twitter style. Second task, what do you need to be creative about at work? Because I'm hoping you're going to tell me you've got various challenges and opportunities, and I hope I'm going to be able to flex the presentation, what we do, to maybe cover some of the things that you're worried or interested about. So 2 tasks, Twitter intro, what do you need to be creative about? You're going to be staying in the same breakout groups all the way through this. So you get to know one another a bit, and you're going to be working with one another as we go through. Without further ado, Jane, over to you. Fingers crossed for the technology. See you in approximately 10 minutes. So people, as you arrive, what I'm hoping for is perhaps some chat input. Looking for some chat input. What kind of things do we need to be creative about at work? What's keeping you awake? What's keeping you worried? What creative opportunities or challenges have you got? So diversity, we've got, thank you very much for that. Definitely pushing the diversity agenda. I'm going to be talking a lot about the power and importance of diversity for today. Peace and quiet, quite. The creative journey, it's a big gap. While everyone's typing, Daniel, can you unpack that a bit for me? What do you mean by it's a big gap?
So 2 points that came out in this, which is following COVID, a lot of us were just thrust into this and suddenly lifting and shifting courses and content very quickly. People's skills and abilities. Some organizations may be more traditional in the way they operate. So that digital journey, that creative journey, that learning journey, for some is massive, depending on where you're up to. And especially when I throw in sometimes like digital learning, we can often have that health and safety hat on, which can mean it's not necessarily as creative as it needs to be.
Quite, Daniel. So I think you will all know the phrase, the knowing doing gap. There's a big gap between what we know and what we do. I find, honestly, when it comes to creativity and innovation, there's a not knowing to knowing gap. There's not even the knowing to get to the doing. We just don't even know what to do to begin with. So until you know what you know, you don't even know what you're not doing, if that makes sense. So I start to repeat myself round and round. I've got lots of stuff here. Gosh, I shouldn't have asked. I've opened a can of worms, haven't we? How do we keep up motivation and energy? How do we avoid burnout? How do we communicate in novel ways? Because we're all disparate, both to ourselves and to our customers. Line managers often stuck in the middle. I've heard often about, because you can have a meeting now just by clicking some Zooms and shoving a meeting in someone's diary space, they just do them, regardless of whether they're helpful or whether we need them. communications, motivation, how to still identify business opportunities and to solve the everyday business problems we're going to be faced by. I'm guessing with COVID, there are all sorts of systems that are no longer working quite right. Sign-off systems, different ways of working, team resourcing, burnout, the tech, different communication styles. Being in the office really can help creativity, says Mike. And I do agree on that one, Mike. How do we, there's a big challenge I've been working on a lot. How do we still build culture, still build collaboration? How do we still bounce ideas off one another when sometimes the screens aren't on, we can't see one another? There's a lot of challenges. I'm going to stop now. The rest of you can probably flick through those and realize that I've opened a Pandora's box that I can't possibly deal with in an hour and 11 minutes, but sod it, I'm going to have a try anyway. So you know how this is going to work. You're vaguely on mute. I can hopefully see some of the chat. We're going to be bobbing in and out. Keep going. Keep paying attention to what we're doing. You've got questions, ask. What do I want to say? I've got too much content. I always have too much content. I'll start quickly, and then by the end, I'll be running at 1,000,000 miles an hour and talking far too quickly. I'm apologizing for that now. It's going to be chaotic. It's chaotic on purpose, because I tell you that, you think that I'm not just unprofessional, but also the fact that the creative process should be flexible. We should be able to play around a bit and have some flexibility. So hopefully I'm going to model some of that. That for some of you, that's just because I'm disorganized. It's not. I really do actually know what I'm doing, but generally I'm going to try and model a slightly chaotic approach. It's interactive, but please be patient with me. I need you to chat, but occasionally, because I've got 1,000,000 times more content than I should probably try and cover, I might have to truncate the conversation a little. So here we go. I'm going to dive into now, as you would expect, so hopefully if the screen works, some kind of presentation where I am going to introduce you to what we need to know to boost creativity, innovation, and agility. Okie dokie. Right. So I can see most of you. Chat, shout away. As you can see, top right-hand side, we want you to be tweeting about this as we go through, sharing your thoughts. CIPD MCR is our hashtag, and I have stolen this picture straight off the CIPD website without license, so please don't send me a bill. Right, I think I've probably gone through most of this already, and Daniel in his introduction is probably giving you a bit of an insight into what we're heading. I believe ultimately, and I'm going to jump to the conclusion as my first thing, that what we need to do in HR, what you need to do as an individual, for all of us, we need to think about, what do we do for individuals and leaders? What do we do for teams? And what about the organization that wraps all around this? If we get those three levels right, me, you, the team, and the organization, all aligned, all pointing in roughly the right direction, chances are that's where the creativity innovation is going to come from, which will help us agilely go about going out and doing stuff. So that's what I'm going to try and get over. Stuff for you, stuff for your teams, and things we can do for the organization as a whole, hopefully quite practical. I told you I'd start with the conclusion, and with all my wibbly wobbly hands going everywhere, I've already done this. What's the conclusion? It's about individuals, teams, and organizations. And when I boil it all down with my final case study, when I run out of time, about the government of Dubai, ultimately, all of these systems boil down to the ways we should be and the things that we should do. And as we act, the teams act, and the organizations has the appropriate process and systems, we have the right culture and leadership and the right stuff in the background to support us. And my honest, fervent belief is that HR is probably the most important function, the most important part of business that can make this happen. Who else understands people and how they think, feel, and behave, and what motivates them, how to put teams together and where they go wrong and how to help them, how to recruit for those, how to build and make the right organizational systems, things like reward, what we're rewarding people for, how we're doing our performance appraisals to make sure we're encouraging more creativity. We are right at the heart of this. So I'm hoping with what I'm going to take you through, I'm going to unpack each of these levels. Now, as Daniel's already done a very kind introduction, just briefly, my whole background has only ever been a one-trick pony. I just do creativity and innovation. I do karaoke occasionally, but that's not professional. But as an academic, writing stuff that nobody reads other than Jeb, who signed in from Wisconsin. Thank you, Jeb, my one academic supporter. I've written stuff about how to profile and recruit, how to coach for it, teams and diversity, the leadership that's required, what's in a creative and innovative culture, all that kind of stuff. Because I'm telling you about those levels, that we need to understand these three things, and the chances are I've hopefully done it. And as a practitioner, recruited, built teams, worked with Channel 4, developed new processes, procedures, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully what I'm going to be taking you through is going to be a mixture of some of my academic stuff, which I will pretend isn't academic by calling them key principles, and then some case studies out of some of the work that I've done. Before we go any further, as you well know, academics are absolutely obsessed with measurement and definition of stuff. I can't possibly go any further without defining our key terms. Those of you who've done masters and CIPD type stuff, you know you have to define your key terms when you start. So here we go. Creativity is a skill. It's a capacity, and it's about having ideas. I know there's too many words written down there, but creativity is about having ideas. And for me, you want one first take-home point, the creative process has a shape like this. It's about diverging. It's about thinking outwards. You find a problem, an opportunity, you spot something, and then we're thinking outwards. And as you can imagine, the mindset that's going to go with that kind of thinking is quite free and explorative. So when we're leading for creativity, it's outwards. Innovation, on the other hand, is I've now led my team and my guys. We've got loads and loads of options and ideas. Now I need to start shutting it down. I've got too many options and ideas. How do I get to a sharp point of action where I'm going to apply something, a new way of working, a new service for our people, a new product that our people can use or our customers can use? So if creativity is like this, open and free, and we're kind of explorative, innovation tends to be getting much more serious and judgmental and getting quite tough about what we do. First take-home point, don't try and do both types of thinking at the same time. When you're trying to generate options and ideas and you keep going, that won't work, that's never going to work, we've got the budget for that. As you start opening up the options, we pour cold water on it and we shut it down because we get too serious too quickly. Most of what I'm going to be talking about when it comes to creativity skills is do the creative thinking first and the innovative seriousness second. Ultimately, though, if we're thinking about agility, if we've got good ideas and we're applying them, hopefully with an agile way, there's no set definition of agility. I was asked to do this for the Digital Agile Leaders Week last couple of months ago. There's no definition as far as I can find, but I would say agility is running around, doing things and learning and iterating quickly. The central premise is that if creativity is based on good ideas, how do we get those? How do we get the right systems and processes together that we turn the ideas into something new and useful, and at the same time run around doing and learning quickly while we apply them? That's the idea, the foundations. What I actually see is probably something rather different. Rather than that kind of setup, actually it tends to be built on perhaps not quite the right foundation, and we do the wrong thing. What we do is we run around doing quickly without having thought carefully about the new and useful thing that we're going to implement, because we didn't spend enough time thinking it through in the first instance. That's probably one of my major kind of approaches I'll be taking as we go through. And I'll explain later how I try to help Channel 4, if I remember, adopt those kind of principles of not running around without thinking it through first. So I told you this is the conclusion. I'm zoning in on the first part of the onion now. I've got my organizational onion. As we unpeel it, we're going to gradually make you cry. So I'm starting off with individuals and leaders. Well, what do we do? What do we do for us? And I have thankfully one exceedingly simple principle. There's many reasons to not be like Donald Trump. It's probably not going to take us very long to go through those, but one of the main reasons to not be like Donald Trump from a creativity and innovation perspective is he screams and shouts at people and he's rude and abusive. This is not very helpful for a creative climate and environment. So the first thing that we can do is to encourage a safe environment where people feel safe with their ideas. Psychological safety, if you want to look up into more detail and find out some more, it's a lady called Amy Edmondson who's done lots of work at Harvard in this area. Why? Why do we need psychological safety? It's time for the academia packaged as and pretended as key principles. So why do we need psychological safety? Into my first of my key principles that underlies the creative thinking process. I call it connections, and Jeb and I, if we were writing in the journals, would call this the blind variation selective retention combinatorial model. I can say that again, but I won't because I'll probably get it wrong the second time. Campbell, 1960. So we've got lots of science here, but I tended to find when I went out to corporate audiences and talked about the blind variation selective combinatorial model, it didn't land very well. So I call it connections instead. The thinking process for you, all of us, when we want to be creative, is you combine ideas. You connect your wisdom, stuff stored in your brain, technical term, stuff stored in your brain. You reach in, you pull down your memories and your knowledge, and you start mashing it together, finding different combinations of stuff. And I would normally spend hours going into lots of interesting examples. For example, how if you took a Walkman and a computer hard disk drive and you connected them, we invent an iPod. If we take a lamp, a sewing machine, and celluloid film, and we combine the three things, we've replicated how the Lumiere brothers connected concepts to make the first cinema projector. So why do we need psychological safety? Because when I feel safe and I'm not being screamed at and shouted at, "You're fired," I find it easier to make interesting connections in my brain. That's it. Pretty much the first simple principle. Encourage psychological safety by being a nice person around everybody else so that they find it easier to go through their own creative thinking process. Second key principle. If the first principle, connections, BVSR, is about what happens in your brain, my second principle is what happens in a group, in a team. And hopefully you've all sat in a meeting, in a group, in a chat room of some kind, where you felt the domino effect of ideas, where someone says something and it causes someone else to think someone else. And by you know it, there's literally ideas bouncing all over the place. We're literally flinging ideas, bouncing off one another. A domino effect, if you're more scientifically oriented, literally use, I get the phrase from, a chain reaction. Much of our behavior will either help set off explosions and chain reactions of ideas by being safe around people, or the absolute opposite. One of my favorite exercises we're not going to do now, be another one you could try out in the workplace, especially with your leaders, is what do people say and do that kills a chain reaction? Because our take-home point is, don't do that. Don't do the things that stop it. But if I am where I think I am, I'm about to put you into some breakouts. So this, Jane, this is a moment for you to panic and get into a cold sweat as I ask you to do something you don't know how to do. Sorry about that. We're going to go back into our breakout rooms, and hopefully, if I am where I think I am, we've got a question. And that question is, what can you do, what can we do to encourage a psychologically safe environment? So what kind of things do we need to do to not be like Donald that will make the right kind of environment that we can all have a part to play in? I'm already worried about the time. We're doing pretty well. I'm hoping if you guys are okay, we could set aside, Jane, about 6 minutes for this conversation, which is going to leave me a little bit of time when you get back to go through some of the comments and see some of your ideas about how we can do that. So without further ado, it is time for me to stop waffling. Over to you. How do you create a psychologically safe environment? Okay, chaps, so I'm thinking hopefully we've been having some discussions about how to encourage psychological safety, probably more easily said than done. So either comments, or if anyone, while people are commenting, wants to step up to the mic and share some of the thoughts in your group, please.
I'll be happy to share a few. I don't want to write that fast. We had lots of ideas coming out. A couple of key things were around really allowing that voice, really going out of the way to say the voice. We want to hear people, and that's about listening to people and encouraging it. And it's also about part of that, I guess, we were talking about was ownership. So when people come up with ideas, not recognizing that was that person's, in some cases, depending where that goes, and people kind of getting that a bit of kudos on that as well. And I think as well, for an organization, we were talking about behaviors being aligned to what people say. So it's no good a business saying we like all this, we've got an open door, but actually when it comes to it, people get shut down. And then one other thing I was going to add, which was something I came across, was with the concept of failure, as we know, but somewhere's got a failure academy, actually. Airbnb run a failure academy, and the concept really of really encouraging failures and hearing those stories and letting people kind of talk about those things.
The more safety critical, I think, Mike, the more safety critical we are, the more we have to be very open to failure. Otherwise, we start to hide it. And we can't afford to be hiding things in safety critical environments. If you're worried you're going to get screamed and shouted at, then it's more than just innovation, but maybe a deeper impact.
Rolls-Royce and Rolls-Royce and Rail Track, not Rail Track, what are they called now?
Yeah.
National Rail?
Network Rail.
Network Rail, that's the one. I know those two companies particularly make a massive deal on failures. I mean, like really big. And as you say, Mark, very much about health and safety there.
Yeah, and I know the advertising industry a while back, in an effort to be playful, developed an award. I think it was one of the UK advertising agencies had an award for the best creative advert that actually didn't work. And it's like, it was a great concept, we really liked it, but you know what, the audience didn't buy it. But you know what, here's an award anyway, because you should be encouraged to try stuff out. Now, thank you very much, Mike. I know there's a lot of other stuff in here that I'm probably not even going to be able to get through all of them. Changing our view of success, being able to connect into the greater good will help us to keep that sort of safety. Smaller groups, definitely, Lisa. I think it's really hard to speak out in front of even 8, 9 people. I'm certainly finding brainstorming anything more than usually about sort of 5 or 6 in a room is pretty challenging. You need to keep it quite small. Letting people know beforehand so they don't feel they're immediately put on the spot, no chance to prepare. Acknowledging different styles. Acknowledging ideas creates a healthy environment. A team charter, agreed ways of working. Jane and I were talking about ground rules about how we shouldn't communicate with one another and how we might admit mistakes or indeed deal with blame. So one of the case studies I did in some work I did with a very large financial services organization, they talked about putting it on the table. Let's put the problem on the table and we'll circle round and we'll deal with it. What we're not going to do is stand around the table and point over it and go, it's your fault. No, it's not, it's your fault. Get it out, put it on the table. Let's not worry about blame. We'll just move forwards. So being vulnerable, having a team charter, easy to say, leading with vulnerability and building trust. And they're the right things, perhaps not always the easiest for us to do. And if we're not getting the role modeling of the people in the senior parts of the organization enacting the same behaviors, well, you're the only vulnerable one who's admitted that they've made a mistake. That might not be politically the most sensible thing that you might do. So I'm going to stop there. I'm so sorry. There's so many other comments here. I hope everyone else, when I get boring, can ignore me and go through those instead. So that was our effort to try and drill into, just briefly, the first of the key concepts, I guess, or first the key learnings around you or individuals, which was psychological safety. And we've talked about many different ways we could do it, trying to capture some of that. And obviously it's all pre-written. What kind of things can I do? Oop, I can't even see that, it's underneath my own screen. Right. Here they come. Okay, chaps. So I'm thinking, hopefully we've been having some discussions about how to encourage psychological safety, probably more easily said than done. So either comments, or if anyone, while people are commenting, wants to step up to the mic and share some of the thoughts in your group, please.
I'll be happy to share a few. I can't don't want to write that fast. We had lots of ideas coming out. A couple of key things were around really allowing that voice, really going out of the way to say the voice, we want to hear people, and that's about listening to people and encouraging it. And it's also about part of that, I guess we were talking about, was ownership. So when people come up with ideas, not recognizing that was that person's, certainly in some cases, depending where that goes, and people kind of getting that a bit of kudos from that as well. And I think as well, for an organization, we were talking about behaviors being aligned to what people say. So it's no good a business saying we like all this, we've got an open door, but actually when it comes to it, people get shut down. And then one other thing I was going to add, which was something I came across, was with the concept of failure, as we know, but somewhere's got a failure academy, actually. Airbnb run a failure academy, and the concept really of really encouraging failures and hearing those stories and letting people kind of talk about those things.
The more safety critical, I think, Mike, the more safety critical we are, the more we have to be very open to failure. Otherwise, we start to hide it. And we can't afford to be hiding things in safety critical environments. If you're worried you're going to get screamed and shouted at, then it's more than just innovation, but maybe a deeper impact.
Rolls-Royce and Rolls-Royce and Railtrack, not Railtrack, what are they called now?
Yeah.
National Rail?
Network Rail.
Network Rail, that's the one. I know those two companies particularly make a massive deal on failures. I mean, like really big. And as you say, Mark, very much about health and safety there.
Yeah, and I know the advertising industry a while back, in an effort to be playful, developed an award. I think it was one of the UK advertising agencies had an award for the best creative advert that actually didn't work. And it's like, it was a great concept, we really liked it, but you know what, the audience didn't buy it. But you know what, here's an award anyway, because you should be encouraged to try stuff out. Now, thank you very much, Mike. I know there's a lot of other stuff in here that I'm probably not even going to be able to get through all of them. Changing our view of success, being able to connect into the greater good, will help us to keep that sort of safety. Smaller groups, definitely, Lisa. I think it's really hard to speak out in front of even 8, 9 people. I'm certainly finding brainstorming anything more than usually about sort of 5 or 6 in a room is pretty challenging. You need to keep it quite small. letting people know beforehand so they don't feel they're immediately put on the spot and no chance to prepare, acknowledging different styles, acknowledging ideas creates a healthy environment, a team charter, agreed ways of working. Jane and I were talking about ground rules about how we shouldn't communicate with one another and how we might admit mistakes or indeed deal with blame. So one of the case studies I did in some work I did with a very large financial services organization, they talked about putting it on the table. Let's put the problem on the table and we'll circle round and we'll deal with it. What we're not going to do is stand around the table and point over it and go, it's your fault. No, it's not, it's your fault. Get it out, put it on the table. Let's not worry about blame. We'll just move forwards. So being vulnerable, having a team charter, easy to say, leading with vulnerability and building trust. And they're the right things, perhaps not always the easiest for us to do. And if we're not getting the role modeling of the people in the senior parts of the organization enacting the same behaviors, well, you're the only vulnerable one who's admitted that they've made a mistake. That might not be politically the most sensible thing that you might do. So I'm going to stop there. I'm so sorry. There's so many other comments here. I hope everyone else, when I get boring, can ignore me and go through those instead. So that was our effort to try and drill into, just briefly, the first of the key concepts, I guess, or first the key learnings around you or individuals, which was psychological safety. And we've talked about many different ways we could do it, trying to capture some of that. And obviously it's all pre-written. What kind of things can I do? Oop, I can't even see that, it's underneath my own screen. Right, I've said that already, so I'm not going to say that bit again. Around the connections bit, around this sort of what can I do for creativity, given that our first connections of thinking about things and joining ideas together can often be superficial, don't stop with your first idea. When you're brainstorming, one of the simplest things you can do to be a better brainstormer is once you've written down your first idea and your second idea, write down a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth. You'll find it gets harder. And by the time you're writing down idea number 6 or number 7, it's probably rubbish. But rubbish ideas start chain reactions. So don't stop with your first idea and don't let your team or your colleagues stop with their first idea. Be careful about the influence you have. We talk about the shadow that we cast, your leadership shadow or our own personal shadow. The way we talk, and one of the things that we get quite subtly, the way we sit there and scowl at people or check our watches, or while someone's talking, they're just playing with our phone at the same time, that body language can start to kill chain reactions in those conversations as well. What can we do? Help other people make connections. One of the things we did at Channel 4 was introduce the idea of a cool wall. If it was fun, if it was interesting, if it was stimulating, you stuck it with a pin on a board, as back in the day. And they did develop a more IT version, a Padlet type approach. But if you found something interesting and you share it with people, it might help them think differently. I think we get a lot of thought leadership, a lot of interesting things to be found from the CIPD that you could share around, perhaps not necessarily with our HR colleagues, but with some of our leadership colleagues in the business that might help them think a little bit differently about how they do stuff. The last bit to say, I guess, as an individual, is we have a myth, I think, in the West of the creator or the creative as an Einstein or a Van Gogh or a Steve Jobs. It's BS, to be quite frank. The creative process in any large-scale organization has many moving parts with many different people making lots of different suggestions along the way. How do you know that if you research something and found a problem that you're not the most important part of solving it? Just the person who came up with the final idea, but if you found the problem in the first place, that's just as important as thinking it through. Testing out an idea is just as important. So we all have a vital part to play in the creative process. Thinking a little bit more then about the function, do your leaders really know what to do to make a safe environment in the practical sense about the language? Have you got any mechanisms for feeding back to them so they are aware of the shadow they cast? So we're all still aware of the concept of something like a 360 and others, feedback loops where the leader can be aware of the impact they have, because often that team leader or that group leader can have a very strong effect on the rest of the team. How can we help? Well, obviously coaching, if it's appropriate. Can we help individuals understand their approach, their own personal take? I would often do that with psychometrics. Can we deal with deal with, such a horrible word, I don't mean that. Can we approach and take a message or a story to the entire senior management committee and community to get them to understand the role of psychological safety? I'll talk a little bit later, if I don't run out of time, about how I took a three-pronged approach of taking the top team, all staff, and then going into the business units to cascade a message about how to do this stuff properly. And if we're trying to build a new culture in a new way, when we're socially distant, potentially with new flexible ways of working, if we do need new ways, can we involve the leaders in that endeavor and engage in culture building? I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. Just going to stop for a second. I can't really see any of you guys at the moment. Any thoughts, questions, anything that comes out of what I've covered so far on individual stuff and the concept of psychological safety there? Now, if I were thinking on individuals, now I'm thinking about moving on to the team level. And I've got kind of three major themes. The good news is the first one is the same. First key theme is psychological safety. It's same for individuals, it's same for teams, makes a difference. But two additional things for us to think about. How do we put our people together? How do we get them to interact? What structures might we have? And are there any skills that might be particularly helpful? Of course, the answer is yes for both of us. I wouldn't have them as bullet points. So here's the first concept around structures, and one I will bring to life for you in a moment. Chalk and cheese. So I was actually working with some entrepreneurs in our local region at the moment, helping them develop new products. And one of their bits of homework is to go and find someone who's different to them to talk to bounce ideas about. One of the quickest, simplest, most effective and powerful ways of being able to boost innovation through how we interact is to start to put unusual pairings together. I'm going to do one of my quick dives into a bit of a case study, and I like this one because it's got my name written in it, where I'm going to explain how we went about a process to invent the world-dominating TV show Gogglebox by doing exactly that, finding chalk and cheese partners, putting them together in a very permissive, very safe environment, allowing them to fail a bit. Everybody forgets that Gogglebox failed for its first 5 weeks, and then the rest is history. If you've not watched Gogglebox, where the heck have you been? If you haven't watched it, it's a program watching people watching TV of other people watching TV. It gets very meta, very quickly, but it's very bloody clever. You just need to make a TV program out of TV shows you've already shown. And if you're Channel 4, you actually get to show half your own TV shows about how good they are and people talking about how good they are, so they watch even more of your TV shows. It's a very clever business model. Anyway, so that's how we went about trying to invent Channel 4. So this is a bit where I get to have my name in lights for a second. So this is Jay Hunt. She was the Chief Creative Officer at Channel 4. She was managing a £495 million a year budget to create all of their creative content across the websites, TV, and Channel 4 film. And she said, I've got a bit of a problem, Mark. My people are not very creative. We haven't won an award for ages. Our revenues are going down and our advertising is going down. And that's pretty much the only thing we really get measured on. So what can we do? So I'll take you through it. I don't teach at Manchester Business School. I used to, but I moved to Manchester Metropolitan, to make that very clear, in order actually to be able to do more of this kind of practical work. And I allegedly have a useful phrase, which is apparently I help different people help each other to think differently. I can't even say it. We've worked with him to understand how to collide worlds together. Now commissioners with very different skills meet informally each week to discuss ideas. So the script executives on Hollyoaks, a soap drama, meet with Grand Designs, a program about designing big houses, to talk about a comedy script, something that doesn't relate to them at all. And as she says, it's the very madness of different ideas colliding, in my terminology, connecting, that leads to hits through chain reactions. Some of our most successful shows came from unexpected quarters. So the science and history team developed Gogglebox, the comedy team commissioned Black Mirror, and our factual team backed the Dangerfest reality show The Jump, where stupid celebrities put on Lycra and threw themselves on skis down a very big slope, hopefully not dying along the way. What did she bring out of all of this? We don't at all presume to know better than the experts, but our people, our teams have become our secret weapon. Groups of savvy, engaged people who understand our brand values come together. As she says at the bottom, creativity is an art, but it can also be a science. We can all sit around waiting for the flash of brilliance in the bath like Archimedes, but I suspect the great brands of the future were those who know how to get the most out of their teams. The concept here is chalk and cheese. And underlying it, of course, as I said earlier, is my third key principle, is that the more diverse a team is, the more diverse a function is, the more diverse a whole organization is, the more creative and innovative it will tend to be. And I've taken out my reference. If you're really interested in this, McKinsey, every year for the last 4 years, have got reports. I think the last one was called Diversity Matters, but they've got a new report every year where they prove the financial return on having a diverse organization. They put it into dollars and cents. I was going to say pounds and pence, but it's American. It's dollars and cents. So only Jeb is going to be most comfortable reading that report. But mix it up, people. If you can harness the strength in diversity, we'll be able to think better. There's a number of things that come with diversity. Number one, if we're different. When we're faced with the same problem, when I reach into my memory banks and start making connections, they're different to the ones that you can make if we're different. If there's a psychologically safe environment and I can share them with you and we can start to set off these chain reactions against one another, having different people sat around the room will help us think differently. One last one, which I think often overlooked, customer or user empathy. If we're making a service or a product or a thing that people want or use or need, and the people in our team don't represent the people who we're providing the thing for, how do we know what they're worried about? How do we know when they get scared? How do we know when they're motivated? How do we know when they get angry? What do they want next? If we're all the same, how do we understand our people? How do we understand our users? So hence, I think diversity is fundamental. I could bore you with a 3-year research collaboration with Zurich Insurance on predicting deep level diversity in innovation team performance. And it does work. We can actually prove, again, this time pounds and pence, that we get better outcomes out of more diverse teams, in this case, in the insurance industry. So most of what I'm now going to share you with advice, you're probably going to get all this. It should be hopefully rather self-evident. So what structures can we have? What can we do? Well, the overall take home, of course, is mix things up. Experiment with different people and different structures and different places. Simplest one, pairs. Put 2 different people together, give them some space and some time. Ideally, if we don't make the time for the resource for the thinking, then it will get in the way of day job, and that gets to the organizational process and procedures I'll eventually get to in a minute. But we can put chalk and cheese partners together. Bring an outsider in. I got this book from a book written by some Harvard Business School professors a few years ago who talked about inviting aliens into your meeting. That could mean, God forbid, we go outside of the safe confines of HR and we ask one of those dodgy people from finance to come and join our meeting. What happens if we have one of the loud people from sales come and talk about their ideas? Just maybe they might not solve our problem, but an outsider might set up a chain reaction that will help us think differently. And I got some really fascinating stories about how a beetle expert once helped the British Army and the British military invent a brand new plane, but I don't have time for that. Much more formal, move people around. Formally start moving people around. If it's all about relationships and networks and who knows who and bouncing ideas off one another, if I don't know you, I'm not going to talk to you. So with BBC Monitoring and a very large telecommunications firm out in Kuwait called Zain, very large telecoms firm, who had grown through rapid acquisition. I think it was 27 companies bought over the space of about 8 or 9 years. They didn't like one another, they didn't know one another. How do we get these networks going? Regularly moving people around, because then they got to break down the silos and get to know one another. One of my favorites, stolen from Pixar, is swarming. Can you get a large bunch of people to be like a bunch of locusts all over a problem? Let them swarm all over and destroy the problem. I tend to do these in a sort of a hackathon or a sprint or whatever kind of words we want to use, where I bring together 100, 200 people around an organizational problem, train up for some facilitators, and then the facilitators I've trained take the 120 people through 1 day or 2 days, sometimes 3, and just try and crack something, but you throw everything at it. The concept here from Pixar was that if you didn't throw everything at it, when you slow down production of filming of something, making a film, it costs $5 million per minute, I believe, when filming stops. So it's well worth swarming anybody and everybody. And I think in the Pixar book, which I can't show you because it's actually holding up my screen, I think he said, I don't care whether the idea comes from the janitor or the director, as long as it gets filming back on, who cares where it comes from? We all know about cross-functional teams, don't need to say any more about that. The take-home point, mix it up, people. Stir it up, I think, as Bob told us once. How can you harness the strength in diversity? I'm now nervously looking back at my clock and I'm realizing somehow I still have a magical 35 minutes to go. We're doing pretty well. So I already said that at the beginning. I'd forgotten I had that last bullet point. If anybody can start to get involved in these things about where people are and starting to, oops, I didn't mean to do that, and starting to influence the thought leaders, the leaders in the organization, that you need to start mixing people up. You always keep recruiting the same people. We still keep resourcing the same project teams. Every single time we have to work on something, it's always the same faces. And it's always, let's be honest, a bit pale, male, and stale. There's probably a chance to maybe mix things up and do things a bit differently, said he, as part of the pale, male, and stale contingency. But regardless, I have now covered psychological safety. Don't be a dick. Don't be like Donald. I'm sorry, I do sometimes get a bit fruity. Structures, mix it up. Well, what about skills then? Can we train teams? Can we give them some tools? Is there some stuff that they can do that will make life a little bit easier? Well, probably yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't have this as a bullet point. So some introductory stuff around this. The good news is, and I hope Jeb is nodding in the background, there's probably 20 to 30 large scale scientific studies on the trainability of creativity. Some of them are very small and they've got some students in a laboratory doing stuff very simply. Some of the more detailed studies have looked at creativity training in the workplace and then tracking that out to actual product development. The one study that I found that was particularly interesting was Hewlett-Packard did an ROI, a return on investment study on creativity and innovation skills training. And in their R&D labs, they believed, I've never seen the data behind it, but they believed that for every $1 that they spent on creativity and innovation skills training for their R&D people, they got $61 back, because they would often develop a brand new world-leading product that was particularly helpful. So you can train creativity and innovation skills. The World Economic Forum suggests, through a range of generally synonyms, that most of the skills that we require in an ever-changing world relate to creativity and critical type thinking skills. A massive CEO survey by IBM a few years back asked, what's the #1 leadership skill for CEOs and leaders of the future? Well, funnily enough, they said it was creative thinking. But the backdrop of this is, despite, as we talked about, talking about being creative and innovative and writing it into our values or our mission, actually training it is another matter altogether. I would argue you need to follow a scientifically robust process and hopefully some tools that have been proven to be helpful. Which gives me an opportunity to bring me onto my 5th key principle, which is not follow the yellow brick road, but follow the creative problem solving process. And if I don't stay true to myself, I will spend hours talking about this. So if you'll start dropping off, I know I spent too long talking about the creative problem solving process, because it's kind of important. Right, it's a cycle. You could start anywhere, but we often go round and round. What's the chances are that you manage to have the right idea once, judge it, evaluate it, implement it, and you get it right first time? Probably not. It's going to be iterative. You're going to go round the creative process probably multiple times. I would suggest we normally start up in the top right. Accumulation, collecting, gathering, what we call in the literature problem finding. What's going on? What's the problem? What's the opportunity? Why are the customers leaving? What does this new legislation mean for our business? What does this new regulation mean? Oh gosh, COVID. All these things happen and we need to understand it. So our starting place usually for the creative process is collecting and gathering insight and information. Because when I understand the problem well, I know what I'm trying to solve. And I've now put more stuff in my brain, and with more stuff in my brain about the problem, I've got more connections that I can make, right back into the creative thinking style of, putting ideas together, connecting them. So we start off with accumulation. We then make our way around, usually to the central zone of the creative thinking process, generating as many options and ideas as possible, thinking outwards. How many options can I come up with? The brainstorming zone. And we leave one vital part of the process till last. And I've already kind of told you that. You leave the evaluation, the seriousness, the judgment towards the end part of the process. And I'm going to steal or paraphrase a quotation from a double Nobel Prize winner. Linus Pauling won 2 Nobel Prizes, and he was once interviewed and asked something along the lines of, Linus, they were quite familiar, he and the journalist by this stage, you appear to be really quite a creative guy. How do you have such good ideas? And he said, and I believe this is the truth, if you want to have a good idea, have lots of ideas and throw the bad ones away. It's pretty much it. If you go back to Alex Osborne, who actually invented the term brainstorming about 1957 or so in his book Applied Imagination, basically says, go for volume, go for broke, go for as many ideas as possible. Most of them will be rubbish, but somewhere in there will be some nuggets of gold that will either help you or set off a chain reaction in somebody else. Now, I wish I had time to tell you about the bit in the middle, the incubator, the back brain, the non-conscious, where we need to park our ideas. But if I do that, I'm going to horrendously run out of time. And I am somehow trying to hint that you need to call me back because other stuff I haven't told you about yet. Right, so I told you there's a creative process. You've seen this. What about the tools? Well, 15 of them mapped around here. And as you'll see, what I try to do, when you buy books like Thinker Toys and others that are all about creative problem solving techniques, there's just hundreds of them. No order, not how you use them, when you use them, for what. And I find it really confusing. I've tried to map often quite well-known tools and techniques, many of which you may know already or are relatively familiar with, but build it around the process. So my tools 1 to 5, I teach teams to understand. So we can either watch people, observe customers, try and understand their motives, generate a how-to statement and interrogate it, gather and accumulate insight. Into the generation zone, there's things like picture storming and brainstorming. I'm going to do tool number 7 with you in a minute with some help for developing ideas. And then there's loads of different tools, many more than this, that can help us choose. The main point being is that there is a process of following something along the lines of some logical steps. It's not a straitjacket. You don't have to start at 1 and finish at 15, and sometimes you backtrack, and sometimes it's a bit messy, but roughly it's kind of what it looks like. So with your permission, I'm hoping, given I've got about 28 minutes left, not that I'm panicking about the time, we're about to go into a breakout group, and you're going to do the same tool that I'm going to do a demo for. So I want you to do some brainstorming. You're going to be doing some brainstorming in a minute to make a better taxi. I'm going to do a bicycle example for you to give you some inspiration in the first instance. So this tool, number 7, is called attribute listing. It was invented by a guy called Crawford, first established in 1974, and he was an engineer. And I have stolen this tool from engineering and I'm reusing it with you. So the way this tool works, like all of my tools, is you usually need a piece of paper or a whiteboard or a digital scratch pad of some kind. And most of my tools only have 2 things that you need to remember because I'm not very clever. And if it's more than 2, I won't remember. So you need a line down the middle, and we start writing down what we know. We make a list of what we know about our product, what we know about our taxi, what we know about our bicycle, what we know about our recruitment process, what we know about how we do onboarding, what we know about whatever is the thing that we're trying to make better. You write down what you know. Often that's what you've already got. So if you're adjusting an existing process, you write down your existing state of play. This is what we do. How can I make it different? If you haven't done it yet and it's a new invention, a new idea, you write down what you think you would do because you don't know, of course, what you haven't done yet. So you'd write down your plan. So in your instance, in a minute, when you do this exercise, you don't have a taxi that you're going to change. You're going to have a plan about what you might work on in a minute. So I'm going to ask you to write down everything you know about a taxi. The key, as you'll see in my demo, is getting into the detail. Brainstorming is often pretty abstract, kind of high level. This tool, because it was designed by an engineer, is very detail oriented. And the data I've come across, if I remember rightly, shows that this tool tends to produce, I think it's 270% more ideas than the traditional brainstorming shout out loud process. So that's what we're going to do on the left-hand side. How you work your way around this, I don't know. We're going to do it in breakout rooms in a minute. You're going to write down everything you know about a taxi. When you finish the left-hand side, and I'll give you about 5 minutes or so to do that, for an additional 5 minutes, we're going to go on the other column in red, the different, and just without judgment, without evaluation, without trying to be too serious, and without stopping with your first idea, take what you know and just say, well, how could I make it differently? That's it. It's no more complicated than that. People often dress up creativity tools like they're super, like rocket science stuff. They're not. What do I know? Write a list, get into the detail. What could I do to make it differently? Let me do a quick example. Here is a worked up example. You're going into your breakout groups in a moment. My example is for a bicycle. So you should recognize this. It's the whiteboard. What do I know? What could be different? And if I go through my superficial thinking, what I know about a bicycle is probably going to be some first observations. And what we know from the creative process, I shouldn't stop here. These are my first connections. I haven't thought very deeply yet. I need to get a bit deeper. Because if I take all of these first things, what could be different to slow, fast? What could be different to dangerous, safe? What could be different to 2 wheels, 3 wheels, or 4 wheels? Well, I'm probably not being all that innovative. But as you see from my next column, I'm going to dig into some of the details. And I'm also going to put far too many words on the screen at once, but here we go. Let's just focus on the top column here, the top row, 2 wheels. So I can just write down, what do I know about a bicycle? It's got wheels. But if I start to break down into the tires, and I could have gone further, there are slick tires, there are wide tires, there are knobby tires, there are sort of hybrid tires that are slick down the middle so you can pedal, but if you lean on the sides, they've got knobbly bits, you don't fall off on the mud. So there's lots of different things you might know about tires. We know there are spokes, and if you were a serious bike head, you'd know there are radial spokes and flat spokes and crossover spokes and lots of different ways that you might do it, and different materials. There's the hub and so on. What you can see in the bold first detail, don't stop there, dig in, get into some more detail, and then we move over to the other column, and without evaluating and judging, I'm going to put some daft ideas up that I went through in this thought exercise about how we could make it differently. So we might start off and say, instead of 2 wheels or 3 wheels, well, there's 3 or 4. Now, if you're naturally an evaluative person, you've gone, Mark, that's very thoughtful, thank you for that, but that's called a tricycle, or whatever a quad bicycle is called, probably a quad bicycle. What you've just done, unfortunately, is not made the world's most psychologically safe environment for me, because you've pointed out that I'm an idiot and didn't know something that you knew, and you could have waited. No one says that being critical and judgmental and evaluative shouldn't be in the creative process. Just leave it for the end. Otherwise, we shut things down too much. So as you can see, what could be different to tires? I could have a hover bicycle. I've wanted one of those since Back to the Future, still waiting. We could replace the wheels with skis. I don't know why, but you could. Caterpillar tracks, pogo. When I thought about the hub, I could have a frictionless hub. When I thought about the spokes, what happened if I made my bicycle stand up on reverse magnets and there was some kind of propulsion system? All I was doing was taking what I know and what could be different. I think I'm probably laboring the point more than is required. Over to you, he said, checking on my timings. I'm going to give you, I'm saying 10 minutes for this, he said, being daring. That's going to be 5 minutes, roughly, of what do you know? I'm leaving it entirely up to you how you record this. I've been doing this with lots of different groups. I find me telling you how to do a workaround is constraining. You find your own workaround that makes sense and tell me what did and didn't work. I want you to go and do this exercise. What do you know about a taxi? About 4 minutes, 5 minutes, then 4 or 5 minutes on what could be different. That's it. Just give it a play, because chances are with playing with this tool, you'll realize it's not too difficult. So I'm going to stop now, he said, and you're into your breakout rooms. So 10 minutes, we're back at 48. Did anyone manage to get around to doing any of the different column before I yanked you all back into the main room?
No.
Yep.
How did it go, Daniel? Did you manage to get anything out?
Yeah. Some of it, when we were talking, it actually started to panic me, because you suddenly realise, like, you know, you don't want to dive in and go, no, you know, that, but as we were talking about before, so when we're talking about driver, for example, well, you don't need a driver, no licenses, no rules, basically anything is up for that, which that's a panic. So yeah, it started to really sort of bring out new ideas. I think the bit we got to, which went from the fact you have to wait for taxis, which moved to any car could be a taxi. Literally, you can just walk up to any vehicle, open it, get in. No one needs to own anything, and basically, it's almost like a version of, you know, things on the like the little trikes you used to have on the roads, little scooters, things like that. So yeah, and actually, one of our thoughts was, I think this was from Sue around. Was this how Uber was invented? You know, you can see that link through to modern ways of working.
Pretty much. This is how I would help organizations invent new products, new services, launch credit cards and so on. Everyone's got a darn good idea of what they should do first, and they just try a little bit harder to try and explore some differences. They'll probably find 1% or 2% will make their product service better. It's not that complicated, but it kind of is if you don't have a process and some tools and you're just used to the typical brainstorming. So with your permission, with my now 13 minutes left, I do see we've got some other things here. Ruth said, different environments, click a button for your own music, sensory lighting, driverless funky styles, teleportation styles. So Lisa's gone that fun. I love that. I love the practical, what we would call incremental innovation, little tiny baby steps, versus disruptive innovation. Teleportation, Star Trek. One of the best ways often of getting to these paradigm busting ideas is to use this exercise and write down the things that are held holy, the things that could not be changed, the things that we accept as sacrosanct. Was a taxi, it's a car. Well, it doesn't have to be. It could be a helicopter. It could be a water ski. It could be a put. It could be anything, a tuk-tuk. We just assume that it's a car. So they did this allegedly in Apple with the piece of paper, with the output, of course, being the iPad. And by destroying the very thing that it was, that the fundamental, that this thing that we record information on, we doodle on, is a piece of paper. And so what could be different? It's not paper anymore. Boom, all of a sudden you open up avenues and those chain reaction explosions. As long as you keep them going and you judge and evaluate later, there'll be something good in there. So I hope you found that helpful. It is by far my favorite tool. It's probably the one that I enjoy sharing and working with the most. And the more I do it, I find the easier and easier it gets. So you've just done design a better taxi, and I gave you no time. I interrupted you half the way through. It sounded like it vaguely worked. I hope you've learned enough that you could try it out tomorrow, maybe later on this week, or maybe next week with yourself or some others. What could you use this tool for you? So I saw other people talking about what you need to be creative about, finding new business models, launching a new business, finding new customers if you're an independent consultant, how to business partner better and get close to the business when we're geographically distant and we can't share a cup of coffee. So we've all got problems. We wrote them down at the beginning. Taking what you've done with this tool, just have a try. What could you use it for? And I promise you, if you give it a go, you'll just find it easier and easier, and I hope it gets better. Tell me how you get on. I hope you give it a go next week. So final thoughts on skills. Do follow a process. Regardless of what tools you use, start with a process. Accumulate understanding. So guys, what's going on? Generate options. So guys, what could we do? Evaluate last. Don't evaluate yet. Now we've got all the ideas. Which ones seem most sensible? Which ones could we progress? Now I've got all sorts of tools for them, but that's effectively what we're doing. The vital bit is the soak time and leaving some time for incubation. That's using the back brain, your non-conscious. I said I wouldn't say anything and I'm going to break my own rule. Why? Your non-conscious brain is really good at making weird connections. It's where your dreams come from. So if it's good at dreaming, it's good at making weird connections as well. So parking things in the back of your brain is really helpful. Stay curious, because if you're not keeping an open mind, how are you going to find the information that will stimulate you, or indeed spot the next problem or opportunity or the next disruptor? Could you bring in an outsider? Could you bring one of those people from finance to be an alien and facilitate your meeting? If it's always you who facilitates the meeting, could you ask one of your colleagues to do it for you instead? Who could you get to do it differently? And often by rotating it around or bringing in an outsider, an alien, might help do things differently. The key, of course, is maximizing the diversity. And I think, as I'll talk about later, if I ever get around to it, I think creative problem solving in teams, if they're diverse, especially functionally and hierarchically, are an amazing opportunity for succession planning. When else are you going to see a wide variety of talent all working on the same problem, building networks? And you see that person and that person, they can work together rather well, can't they? You'd never find out otherwise. Often, in my opinion, using these sprints, hackathons, bringing together a diverse team to solve a problem and get taught some skills at the same time can be a really powerful way of doing things. So I'm on to the final stretch. He said nervously, with 9 minutes available, that I would do my final bit, and I've not got too much to share, but there is supposed to be one more discussion. What's going to happen is something like this. I am going to talk as fast as I can and get into discussion. There is a possibility, somewhere in the region of about 1,000% possibility, that I'm going to overrun by somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes. If you get to 7 o'clock and you're more than sick of my voice and need to go, just quietly shut down the camera and leave and send me PayPal money, anything you want to show your appreciation. That's absolutely fine, but just leave. If you want to hang around for a bit, I'll talk a bit and I'll finish off probably about 5 minutes late. So I'm going to do that so I can keep going. Thank you so much for coming. If you need to go, go when you need to. If not, hopefully you can stick around for a few minutes as I take you through what do we need to do at the organizational level. I've told you this already. This was the first thing I kind of showed you as the conclusion. Individuals and leaders and the teams with the organizations and processes and systems, if they all align in the right kind of way, will be the way that we need to be, and we'll be doing the things that we need to do. And we get all of that together, that's how we make for a humming organization that thrives its way into being highly creative. I did mention, so one of my big studies, big bits of interactive work, has produced a load of policy implications and a whole program of work streams within the government of Dubai, was this. It started about 5 years ago with a very set agenda by the government of Dubai to try and be one of the most, if not the most innovative government in the world. That was their stated agenda. Their objective, they said, do this research with us, because we're never going to meet our national innovation strategy of being super innovative if we don't get the people stuff right. We're great on, we've got reports on telecommunications, finance and innovator hubs and all the technology and city zones. What about the hearts and the minds of our people who actually do the thinking? So can you do an audit, if you like, do a deep dive to understand what's going on in our organization? So we designed a study, a practical action research study, where I handed out questionnaires and measured stuff through surveys, but we also asked people to fill in a question. And that very simple question was, what would you do to make it more creative round here? We spoke to well over 1,000 different people across the government, across multiple different parts of the government, from ministers down to frontline operatives, and it gave a broad understanding of what it was like, looking at individual factors, team factors, leadership factors in the organization, which hopefully should start to sound a bit familiar. I do what I say I do. They do the research in the way that we then do the practical stuff as well. Here's the output of the data modeling. We did some data modeling on the things we measured. We measured people's perspective of the culture. We measured how engaged or how motivated they felt. We measured how much freedom they felt they had. We measured how much support they got from their bosses and their colleagues. This is basically very similar to a measurement of psychological safety. Do people support me? Do they not scream and shout at me? Do I get nice feedback? And ultimately, the bit at the right-hand side is what we're interested in. People being confident to have ideas and actually doing innovative stuff. What we found is you move from left to right, effectively without the culture in the right place, you don't make the transition across. It's the culture that eventually ends up feeding that people feel creatively confident and innovative doing. If you like, and you've all heard this phrase, and I've completely mishmashed the conclusion, I'm not being very scientific here, I would argue that your creativity and innovation culture eats whatever strategies you have for being creative and innovative. You can bring in some outsiders, you can have some brainstorming groups, you can do all this kind of stuff. But you know what, if the culture, the way we do things around here is not permissive and safe, it's largely going to be a waste of time. And that's largely what this diagram showed. So ultimately, as we took together our survey data and all the responses that people said about what would make it creative around here, we did some thematic analysis and we came up with our major themes that I've already told you about. The culture and leadership and the supporting practices, the way we should be and what we need to do. So our policy implications that I presented in January about a year and a half ago, it's about 2 years ago, to UA ministers. And this is the words from the report. And it's what I said at the beginning. If you want the right place, it's a system of individuals, teams, the leaders, and the processes and procedures all aligned. I told you this at the beginning. Same for you as it was for presenting to government ministers. I said I've got 25 policy implications. They told me I was allowed 5. I said I'm not releasing the report because I'm a bit of an arse, and I will not do you the disservice of taking something that's very complicated and boiling it down to 5 things that you can do. I've told you about individuals, teams, organizations, all the culture, and you want 5? No chance. So I presented it anyway with that GIF, or however you call it. The government ministers did look a little surprised at seeing that GIF, but anyway. Start on the left, white words. All the white words 1 to 9 should be ruddy obvious from what we've said now. If there's something surprising in here, you probably haven't been paying enough attention, or I've done a very bad job of explaining it. So I probably don't need to say very much about those, I hope. When we move on to the right-hand side, this is all the stuff that needs to be aligned. This is the stuff that you guys do day in, day out, much of it. This is the stuff that needs to be supporting. If this stuff doesn't point towards being more creative and innovative, it ain't going to happen. So just have a little look at these. And in a moment, because I've got lots written in the report that you won't want to read, and neither does anybody else, but we're going to do, if I hope, we've got enough time to bob into a quick discussion group. In fact, thinking about that list, and I'll put it back up a bit, pick one for you: recruitment, onboarding, induction. I'm going to put the list up in a minute. I want you to pick one of them. I want you to type into the chat box, what could we do differently? What could we do differently as an HR function around recruitment if we're going to support the individuals, the team, and the organization? What about onboarding? I'm sorry I'm truncating. I really want this to be a discussion, but I do have some other stuff I wanted to share with you. So pick one. I wanted to set aside a minute, but I've talked too much like usual, and I hope I've had a good time. Pick one of these. Given what we've been talking about, the key principles around helping people make connections, setting off chain reactions, exploring diversity, following a process, and so on, what could we do differently? Just going to stop for a second. So this is the point where most of you need to go, but hopefully some of you are still going to be doing some typing. Clear routes to innovation and implementation. Dave, do you want to say a little bit more about that? What did you have in mind there?
Mark, if you don't have a route to get your idea into action, it just might get lost.
Totally. And it's very easy if we're not a big cheese and a big leader, you might have got an amazing idea, but how do you cascade it? How do you share it? How does it get to the right people to work on it, to build on that idea? What many organizations would call an idea management system. Google probably has the most famous one where any Googler can type in any suggestion and any other Googler can vote it up and down. It's basically like Reddit for Google. You just vote the ideas up and down. For about 9 months at one stage, the top suggestion for Googlers was to buy Iceland, not the supermarket that sells deep frozen goods, actually the country. And what they had in mind, they wanted to turn it into the world's first geothermally heated data center. They wanted to be able to run the whole of Google and all of its electrics using thermal heating by buying Iceland. Unfortunately, the Icelanders didn't want to move, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. What else have we got? Recruitment, not recruiting for fit. If you want the culture to change, Yolanda, that is a beautiful suggestion. And in a moment, I've got, if I have your patience, a very quick case study on how we did that to help create a really interesting TV show. Another one. Remove hierarchical progression plans and focus on L&D that builds on transferable skills. That's how we're going to set off chain reactions and start influencing one another and crossing over boundaries. Intelligent risk taking to get in the balance of the permissiveness, but also not allowing people to make completely stupid risks. So what frameworks are there to help them manage risk, to understand what risks there are? Right, with your permission, I'm going to now share with you a few case studies that hopefully pick up on some of the things that we've been talking about. So hopefully it shouldn't take me too long. I've got a few slides and I'm done. Right, so I've asked you to do a little bit about that. Sorry for truncating. First case study. Here, it's Guess the TV Show again. It's not Gogglebox. Guess the TV Show. So I was approached. We haven't got a team. We've got a show. It's not very well developed. We've got a basic idea. You need to recruit the entire production team. That was the challenge. Can you put together an assessment center to recruit the entire creative team for this new TV show? Our problem is we only ever recruit the same old boring people. We need to be a bit more diverse, we think. Now, I know from my own research that basically interviews are at best good at identifying about 1.5% of the variance in people's creative thinking scores. So if you're interviewing people and going, are you creative? They go, oh yeah, like the Churchill dog. Are you very creative? Oh yes, I am. Can you give me an examples of when you were creative? Oh yes, here's one I've stolen from someone else at work. And then when we get them into work, we discover they're nowhere near as creative as they said they were. It's easy to say, much harder to do. So interviews are terrible, as are many other methods. So this is what we designed in order to put together the team. I tested them for creative thinking using a divergent thinking measure. I measured their personality using the Big Five, the deep Big Five, the Neo-PIR, in order to understand at a very granular level what drove these people, what was their personality traits, because I want to make them different. I measured their cognitive ability, their thinking, their intellect to a certain extent. I measured what they were interested in, their motives. I used the Hogan motives, values, and preferences inventory. And we gave them a team working exercise to see how they work in conjunction with others, given a very short period of time to design some new show elements, exactly what the job was, a work sample test. And then to show that they had the ability to be able to present, they actually had to present it to the big cheese himself. Can't tell you who that was, otherwise I'll give away the thing. So that was how we did the recruitment. The key was, because we could get numbers out of most of this stuff, or even just turn it into numbers, we then relentlessly try to maximize the diversity. So we're thinking of a team of about 12, 10 producers with introverts and extroverts, agreeable people, disagreeable people, really detail conscious people, and people who just do the big picture. people who are incredibly creative, people who are perhaps much better at convergent and getting to the right answer, mash it up, as you would imagine, as I've been saying. What did it do?
Dive in.
Yes,
are you using your slides at the moment? Because we can't see them if so.
Oh my goodness. Oh, I am. I've done a bad one, haven't I? What I was then going to do is then say, what happens when you put this team together? We measured all these different things and maximized stuff. Well, what did we get out the other end? Allegedly, the show that was created produced 70% of all the revenues for the company that owned it. Annually, bringing in between 30 to 40 million pounds a year. The advertising revenue on top of that for the TV program that showed this TV program are made even more. You're probably getting close to working out who it is now if I hadn't shown the photograph already. Phone votes worth about 8 million. The show tour 3 million per annum. Nobody knows how much they made out of iTunes. Of course, the program was X Factor. We put together the production team to develop X Factor. And as we would find in terms of a change initiative, we used, excuse the dodgy terminology, the low-hanging fruit of the success of this endeavor, a quick win, if you like, to then take this approach and apply it to the rest of Sony Music Group, which part-owned Psycho TV, Simon Cowell's production. So now I'm going to do my next case study, just expanding on this very quickly. How do you take that concept and bring it to life in a systemic way that will make sense, I hope, from HR people? So just quickly, Sony Music, who had Britney Spears, Bob Dylan, George Michael, all sorts of incredibly, very, very profitable acts, had 18 months worth of money left. Because of Napster and illegal file sharing and people just watching stuff on YouTube, effectively, they weren't making any money anymore. So they chose a new strategy. We will no longer expect to make the bulk of our revenue through selling records and CDs. We will do digital stuff, selling digital music, events, TV, merchandising, events, of course, like the X Factor show. But the people we have in our business don't know how to do this. They are traditional music people and they don't know anything about the new digital world. We need new leaders and new management, but how are we going to do that? The principle I brought to the table that I shared with the CEO and the HR director was what I called wild card hiring. One simple thing that we can do is let's make sure when we're going to recruit somebody for a senior position that at least one of the people we're going to talk to and consider doesn't come from the music industry. Because as it says here, I did a quick calculation. You've got 250,000 years or 250,000 years worth of collective experience of the music industry inside your four walls. Surely we can afford to recruit a few people who don't share that experience. So how did we do it? Far too many words. Attraction recruitment, which I hope some of you managed to talk about. Activating diverse people, talking to different people to get them to apply. Then the wildcard hiring for each time, make sure someone was different. Doing the profiling and adapting the same kind of recruitment process to find the difference. When they joined, they're given some creative problem solving skills, just like Disney does as part of its onboarding process. And I based the induction on their own personality so to help them hit the ground running. If you've got a wild card, then if you've got a wild card, then you probably also need to put that wild card with someone who understands the ropes, understands the politics and all the people and all the processes, a safe pair of hands. They're not recruited together, but it's someone who'd be like an internal mentor. As these new diverse people are joining to help them embed and get going, they're given ongoing psychometrics-based coaching and helping them put together mixed up teams following the same principle that we use to create X Factor. As part of the succession planning, we're constantly trying out different projects and looking for different people. Now, I've got one slide left, he said, which is how to do it with learning. This is it, final slide, I promise, and I'm going to stop talking despite being way over the 6 minutes I said I was going to take. I'm now at 7. I can't tell you who the company is because I've signed an NDA, but genuinely, and I only really took the job, well, it's not true, I mainly took on the job because they actually are rocket scientists. I'm not joking. The company I'm working with, global rocket science organization that launches satellites. How did we get to the point of embedding creativity and innovation learning skills across the whole business? What I didn't do was go, you need to teach everybody, because that never works. That's not a very good pitch, is it? Because that just sounds very disruptive and very expensive. So I went for a quick win. Knowing somebody that I knew already who'd approached me, can you help me and my team invent some new enterprise products for our satellite business? So we did. And then everyone found out that we did some sprints and we did a hackathon and a sort of a design thing, and we invented some new stuff and it was successful. So then the top team went, that worked well. Can you come and talk to our people? So I talked to the top 140, 150 leaders of the organization, and I focused for them on the outer onion. As a top team, as the senior business leaders and the divisional heads and the presidents, you need to understand the culture, the structure, and the processes, the organizational stuff. We then cascaded down, and what we did for all the other colleagues, for everybody else, was rather than focusing on the outer thing, for senior leaders, we focused on what you can do for you and what you can do for your team and a few tools. And as we slowly build momentum, we're gradually building creative facilitators embedded within the business so they can keep taking on new challenges in diverse teams, building people and moving everybody around. That's 3 examples of how you do the organizations and systems and bring it all together. So this is the final summary slide, everything on one page, hopefully. What do you need for you? Safety. What do you need for teams? Safety. What do you need written throughout the whole organization? Psychological safety. At the team and the structural level, mix up the structure and the skills. And if you get the culture and the leadership right and an alignment in the systems with HR in the absolute center of this, chances are that's how I think we end up with a highly creative and innovative organization that can run around learning and doing things in an agile way, solving problems and making things better. That was me slightly, I say slightly because I always underplay, massively overrunning. Everyone can go home now. Thank you, everybody. That was awesome because I got to talk a lot and I like doing that. How did you all find it? Let me stop sharing 1 second.
So that's my next question. So firstly, a massive thank you. At this point, you can now take a breather. No, you mean it's no mean feat. So a massive thank you. I'm going to ask if you've got one key takeaway at this point that's immediately in your minds. If you can share that in the group, but obviously also on Twitter, LinkedIn. I've just added the details. It'd be great to hear what you think. We will be sharing the slides and obviously recording. And I just want to say a massive thank you. There's a lot that I've been able to take away from today. We will be sharing some feedback survey links. Please complete that. Help us further develop. So I can see lots of thank yous coming in. Nina, lots to think about and very engaging. So thank you, Mark. Great session, great case studies. 2 takeaways. You can train and use the process. Thank you, Sarah. Very useful. Keep your thoughts coming in. At this point, it's now where we can all go away and stretch our legs, and I hope you've had a fantastic evening. Rebecca, one of the most energized sessions you've ever attended. Can I hear you? I'm sure that's a yes from
Rebecca,
Mark.
well done. Just in the post. I thought you were going to forget to ask me that question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, weddings, bar mitzvahs. I do karaoke as well. Not that anybody wants that, but yeah, honestly, yes, you can hire me. But more than anything, I'm really interested in how you found the tools. And for most of these things, I'm on the other end of a LinkedIn thing. Quick question. Yes, you can hire me, but if you've got quick questions, ping them about. We're a community, and I hope we can all share and learn from one another. And I've learned loads from you, from stealing all your ideas about psychological safety. So thank you.
And that's a really great point around the sharing the network. And thank you to everyone who's been tweeting throughout the session. Please add your thoughts following the session. It'd be great to hear. But otherwise, at this point, I'm going to say just a massive thank you and a big round of applause. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Well, thank you to you guys. And most importantly, thank you to everyone else who helped out in the breakout sessions with not much time, not much preparation. You'd never know that literally did that brainstorming exercise off the cuff. So thank you for throwing yourselves in, all the facilitators, really appreciated. And thank you for having me.
Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great evening.